ora, my name's Nevo Flynn, I'm the Program Director at Greenpeace Aotearoa, and this is our regular Greenpeace live show. I want to acknowledge that tonight we're filming this show in the context of an ongoing massacre in Palestine, and with our government working tirelessly to undermine te tiriti. So that's the context in behind the conversation that we're having tonight. Tonight it's all about trees, tree protection, and standing up for forests. And I'm joined tonight by two wonderful, staunch, long-time tree protectors. We've got lots of hot takes on a lot of things, and I'm sure you do too, so we'd love to hear from you. If you type any comments or questions that you've got into the comments section, we'll try and get to your questions as we go. Over to our guests. So tonight, let's get started. I'm joined by these two lovely tree protectors. We'll start with Zane Wedding of Ngāti Pīkāhau. Sorry about that. Zane is an arborist, an activist, and a Rākau advocate. And Zane's standing up for the mana of trees. He also advocates on Gaza issues and te tiriti. So Zane, thanks for joining us tonight, my friend. Also with Nick Young here, who is Greenpeace Head of Communications. He's been at Greenpeace for going on 23-ish years now. And he looks after all things behind the scenes, media and comms, and he got started in native forest action in the 90s in his activism. So we're going to be talking about these things. Behind the camera, we've got our lovely crew. We've got Oren, Clay, Elliot and Rhiannon helping us out tonight. So thank you all, team, behind the camera. Zane, we're going to start with you. You have a background as a competitive tree climber.
Yep.
How did you get into that, and how fast are you really?
I mean, I used to be a little bit faster, but like arboriculture and trees, specifically tree climbing, that's been my life since I was 16 years old. So literally a couple of days after I was kicked out of school, tree work found me, and through arboriculture I found competitive tree climbing, and I have been literally tied to trees ever since then.
Yeah, quite literally sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
And Nick, you're head of comms at Greenpeace, which is usually behind the camera, not in front of it. So this is not necessarily your happy place. What's your connection with trees, and what do you do at Greenpeace?
Yeah, this is unusual for me to be on this side of the camera. I have been with Greenpeace for a couple of decades, as you said, and I'm the head of communications, so I look after all of our media work and social media and petitions and the website and that sort of thing, and lead a great team of people who do that with me. And my connection to trees goes back a long way as well. As you said before, before Greenpeace, in the late 90s, I was involved in a campaign to stop logging on the west coast of the South Island with a group called Native Forest Action.
Awesome. I look forward to talking about that a bit more. Zane, can you tell us a bit about Mana Rākau, what it is and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, so Mana Rākau it's like a tree advocacy group. It's also a group that was like founded at the fight to protect the trees of Canal Road, which were like a really special native grove of Rākau in Avondale. And through that movement, Mana Rākau was formed with this real intention. If you look to the way that urban ngāhere, our green spaces within like urban environments have been destroyed since kind of 2010. You can see in any kind of community around Auckland where there is low tree coverage, there is this need and want to retain large trees in particular. And so Mana Rākau was formed out of that. What a lot of people don't realize is in Auckland, we don't have any kinds of tree protection other than the protection of our most valuable heritage trees. And that has led to the decimation of our urban tree canopy, and that decimation is what has caused this movement of people who are coming out willingly to kind of stand in front of the destruction of trees, and that's what Mana Rākau is. We're really lucky to be like founded and given our name through mana whenua of Ngāti Whātua ki Kaipara, and all of those things just so beneficial in terms of the movement to protect the rākau. We understand that it's not just about the environment, it's actually about protecting the whenua and these ancient rākau that are so valuable to our culture and our identity as New Zealanders.
Mm. You mentioned since 2010, we've really seen the destruction of trees. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, so, and still happening now, but around about that time was when the RMA was slashed, and this was under a different national government. And prior to that, Auckland and different places across Aotearoa had forms of tree protection. It meant that in order to cut down trees, you had to engage with councils and ensure that those trees weren't providing meaningful value to the community. And in 2010, 2012, when they slashed away the RMA, they took away all of those tree protections. And what we have seen is the decimation of our urban tree canopy. This has led to places like Māngere and Otahu having some of the lowest tree coverage urban tree canopy in the modern world. And this now is permeating into places like Christchurch as well. So what we're seeing is, because of this legislation change, much like what's happening with Fast Track, that's just escalating that again, we're seeing and have seen the destruction of our urban canopy, massive tree canopy loss, and alongside that, we have actually seen an uptake in arborists who aren't being guided ethically by legislation. So now any person with a chainsaw can pretty much just go out there and cut trees. And our tree protection laws, they didn't just protect trees, they protected an industry that kind of made me. So it's multifaceted, and it's just super important that here we are able to, in Aotearoa, we are able to nurture our green spaces, especially in our urban environments.
Mm. So I think it's about a third of Auckland's canopy was lost since 2010, is it? I think that's right.
Yeah, so it's about a third of our green canopy, and it would be a little bit more than that if you're talking about what's on privately owned land. But the more the more astounding statistics are when we're talking about our large tree canopy. The council will do these really tricky things where they'll talk about green canopy and they will include trees that have been freshly planted, don't really provide too much value, especially when we talk about carbon sequestering and things like that. If we're talking about our large tree canopy, the trees that provide value in terms of our bird life, having kiriru and stuff like that, those are the trees that we are seeing go every single day. And that's where stats aren't really given to us clearly, but we do know that in a place like Māngere or Otahu, trees over, I think it's 15 metres, make up about 2% of the trees. There's not a lot of them, and that means that there's not a lot of birds there. And what that means is that these kids who grow up in these urban spaces, they grow up with this disconnection to te taiao. They don't get to see or hear the tui flying through their neighbourhood. They don't get to feel tōtara or see the kōwhai bloom, and all of those things are so important when you're talking about young Māori and tangata ole moana who are living in these neighbourhoods who don't get to kind of connect with te taiao in a way that they have a right to as New Zealanders. Like that, te taiao, the environment, a green Aotearoa, that is such a central po to what it means to be from Aotearoa, to protect green spaces. And now we have tamariki who are growing up in a world devoid of that, and e haere te mea tika, that's not right. So.
And there's a bit of a reason why the leafy suburbs are the kind of swankier suburbs, the rich suburbs, eh?
Yeah, but of course. And this is the whole thing when we talk about legislation again and the way that it affects our communities. All of these places that were targeted for intensification, e pai ana, kei te marama, I know what it's like to live in spaces where people need houses. I live in Māngere, I totally understand that. But it's density done well It's building beautifully. That's what we need. We don't just need to cut down all of the trees. You know, scorched earth policy, cram everybody in like sardines, and then when the rains come, we've built a concrete swimming pool where we've seen this in the floods recently, where the streets just fill up and people are paddling down roads and kayaks, swimming down roads and kayaks. That's because we have built, especially in these intensified areas, we've built a world that is devoid of green space. And because of that, people are at risk now. And you have to be well off to be outside of this, to be outside of seeing what it's like to drive down roads that used to be lined with trees, and now they're just lined with nothing but 3-story apartments that block out the sun and don't allow birds to fly in our neighborhoods. And this is the importance of tree protection, because when you protect trees, you protect manu, you protect all types of things within your neighborhood. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, you mentioned at the start, council are only protecting the most valuable, so to speak, trees, but how are they considering value of trees versus how you might consider value of trees?
And the truth is, they're not even doing that. You know, they're not even doing that. Some of the most exquisite trees, extraordinary trees, trees that are on private property have no protections on them. And even though people and groups like Mana Rākau are out there advocating, trying to push council to put these these heritage listings on them, council aren't doing that. And there doesn't seem to be like a real willingness at any level, local government or central government, to want to protect nature in any way at the moment. So yeah, there are heritage trees in Auckland, but there are a list of trees waiting, a long list of trees waiting to be put on to that list. And every day that list gets smaller because those trees are disappearing because there are no protections on them.
And I think all of us have some experience of the only protection for a tree being a person, any one of us standing 100%. In front of a chainsaw, hey? I want to talk a little bit about the kind of activism to protect urban trees first, but Zane, you spent quite a bit of time living in a tree.
Yep.
Do you want to tell us about that, what it was like, what made you decide to do it?
Yep, definitely. I mean...
and where was it? Tell us a bit about the campaign. I mean,
that grove of trees, once again, in Avondale, right across the road from a kaianga or a massive apartment complex. 50-odd trees, all mature, all natives. Kereru live there. Like when I first moved into the trees at Canal Road, there were a bunch of kereru living there. One lived in the tree with me for 4 days while I slept there. And then one day it just flew away. And I know that kereru is not living in Avondale anymore, whānau. Those kids who live in those kainga order buildings, they won't get to see that kereru again. But I was a lecturer at the time, teaching rangatahi from South Auckland about Rākau. And the maere that was at Canal Road, there were 2 of them. You will not find another 2 maere from where I'm sitting all the way up to Cape Reinga. That's how rare they were. Maere has this like really significant story, like whakapapa in te ao Māori. It's Rākau rangatira. Only a rangatira could hold a maere taiaha. When I would take my students to Canal Road, and this is even before these trees were scheduled to be removed, I would take young Māori rangatahi in there and teach them about the story of the maere, and they would hold it like they were rangatira. Of course, I'm going to move into a position where we have to protect that, because these trees were helping young Māori not just get jobs, get a career, but have a reconnection to like a lot of urban Māori growing up in the cities have a connection to these stories that come from te ao Māori. And that's why I moved into these trees. You know, hino, maire, mātai, kauri, tawa, all growing in this like really small space where you could walk around and tell those stories, the story of the kauri and the tohora. You could walk around and tell the story of the totara. All of these things in this tiny little space in this intensely impoverished area, and there was this ngāhere that they deserved, that urban tamariki deserved, rangatahi deserved, birds living there, and they just wanted to cut it down. Kyle. And it wasn't just me, it was tons of people from the community. Like, on days there were hundreds of people there protecting those trees. I had my connection to trees through like a lifetime of climbing, through the way that they brought me back to my Māoritanga. But other people just had it because that was where they had grown up. You know, like other people had it because they wanted green spaces for the people on that street. There were so many people willing to just sacrifice for that small grove of trees. And for Canal Road, it's like a microcosm of the willingness across Aotearoa for people to protect that which they value inside their community. And often that is going to be the bird that you wake up to, have your morning cup of tea and look to in that tree that's just outside your house. People are willing to protect that. It adds value. So to our lives, to the lives, like we have studies that prove that having trees in your neighborhood is good for you, like your mental well-being. And I know that people are going to stand up for this because Canal Road is the perfect example of that. Māori, rangatahi, tangata tiriti, tangata ole moana, it didn't matter who you were. People from all across Tāmaki Makaurau, rich, poor, everybody was there, because that just shows how much New Zealanders care about te taiao, the natural environment, even if you're in a city.
And I guess it kind of seems wild that, I don't know, often when you're doing activism, you get to a point a decade after doing some piece of activism and think, oh God, we're still protesting this shit. So Nick, turning to you, I mean, you started protecting native forests in the 90s, so this must feel a bit of a rerun for you. Tell us a bit about how you got involved in native forest action in that campaign.
Yeah, I mean, that is a long time ago, and I think the way I got involved in it really was just a series of coincidences, to be honest. I one day saw a poster on the wall of a house, and this is the poster here.
Something you prepared earlier?
This is the poster that got me started on my activism journey, and but I saw it and I was sort of captivated by it. You know, there's this guy sitting in the tree. He's wearing red tights. He's got this gigantic banner hanging underneath him that's obviously hand painted, and it says "Haere mai NFA welcomes those who respect the forest."
I can hold this
and
up to you.
it didn't say a lot more than that, so I stood there for ages wondering about it and wondering about why he was there and how he got up there and what happened next. But then shortly after that, I was watching the news with my flatmates, and this news piece came on about these people who were occupying a forest in Charleston on the west coast in the South Island, and it was the same people. And then we just had this new flatmate move in, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's my sister." And so we connected with them, and me and my flatmates at the time ended up going down there and meeting them and spending a bit of time down there. And then we came back to Auckland, and we sort of started the Auckland chapter of Native Forest Action and did some stuff up here and fundraising and gate crashing the National Party conference and the town hall and various things like that, lots of postering and banners on bridges and all of that stuff that we still do today. We did it then, and then sometime later I decided to go down there, so I went down to the west coast and spent another 2 or 3 years down there and in Nelson working on that campaign. So it was just a series of things that ended up with me doing that.
In kind of prepping, having a look at some photos for this show, one of the things that we talked about was how Native Forest Action doesn't exist now because it put itself out of a job. It won, which is a wonderful achievement. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the campaign and how it won?
Yeah, it's a rare thing in some ways, and really lucky for my first foray into activism to have worked on a campaign like that was ultimately successful, because that doesn't always happen. No matter how well you run a campaign and how hard you work, sometimes you just don't win, but we won that campaign, and so that's what sort of gave me the bug in a way, and maybe why I'm doing it to this day, because I got to see how effective we can be when we campaign like that. And it was a very grassroots campaign. You know, there was lots of people involved all over the country, in lots of different towns, and we worked in lots of different ways in lots of different places, but it was all focused on the forests on the west coast. And you know, we went into the forest, and there was an occupation which happened before I got involved, but they spent a whole summer living in the trees, a little bit like you did, Zane, in Canal Road, and going in and out and getting in the way, and by doing that, stopping the logging happening physically. But we also spent a lot of time going into the forest and taking a lot of photos and getting video, and then taking that out to the rest of the country, you know, and using the media to tell the story of what was happening in those forests. And when you're in there, it was plain to see the damage that was being done, but all of that would have happened out of sight, out of mind, and nobody would have really known if we hadn't gone in there and exposed it for what it was. It was a government-owned company called Timberlands, so it was a state-owned enterprise. And back then it was the national government and Jenny Shipley, and they were all very in favour of the logging. And the sort of PR around it was that it was selective logging, and where they could surgically remove just some trees from the forest, and they used helicopters even to pull them out. And so the PR lines was that it was doing no damage, and that it was just very selective in the way that they were taking trees out. But in actual fact, they were cutting these big roads through the forest, and they were using helicopters, but they were taking the trees to these sites, and then trucks were coming in and they were trucking logs out, and they were cutting down rimu trees and beech trees. So they were being selective in a way, but they were basically taking the biggest and most important trees out of the forest. So we used to talk about it as taking the eyes out of the forest. And so it was doing a lot of damage, and we were able to show that to the rest of the country, and over time won people over to the idea that these forests needed to be protected, and over time built a lot of support for the campaign and for what we were asking for. And ultimately, when the government changed, Helen Clark came in as the new Prime Minister, and up to the election had promised to stop the logging if they would get into government, and which they did when they took power in 1999. Soon after that, the Forest Act was passed, and those forests were saved. So a lot of them are now national parks and various other forms of conservation land. So that's how it all happened, really.
Activism works.
Yeah, did that time.
That's awesome. I mean, it's a pretty different world in terms of communications, and I know a little bit about your time in Native Forest Action, and I think even then you were the person behind the camera, or the person doing that kind of behind the scenes jobs, and obviously you were a core part of setting up Greenpeace's first website and MySpace page, as we've learned, and transitioning through into YouTube channel. You're the person who's done all of that. So the world around us has changed quite a lot. Has the activism changed?
Has the activism changed? I don't think activism has changed. I think the same principles that worked then are true now as well. Like picking an issue and making complicated things simple, and communicating through powerful images, and showing people what was at stake, and getting people on board with what you're doing, and building up a movement of people behind what you're trying to do was the way that we ran that campaign then, and it's the way that we run campaigns now. So I don't actually think much has changed in the time that I've been doing it. We just have better bandwidth now. And so things have definitely changed in the time that I've been doing this. When I started, there was no YouTube and no Facebook and no Twitter, and it's hard to remember really what we did with all our time back then without having to do all that. But yeah, I can remember pulling apart head torches and security cameras and combining the two things together to make a camera that you could wear on your head. which is like in a way the sort of pre-GoPro.
You
Probably could have made a lot of
GoPro.
money out of it, out of the idea, but yeah, and they used to connect up to a big motorcycle battery in a backpack, and this weird microwave transmission thing that would have to have a line of sight, and you'd have to line things up and transmit video from people in up trees or on bridges and on buildings. Yeah, so that was, you know, that was before phones had cameras, and so yeah, lots of things have changed in that way, and it's got a lot easier. But I think it's also harder in some ways because everybody's just bombarded with so much information now. You know, it used to be easier to talk to people, I think. So the bandwidth has got better, but also the bandwidth talking to people is more difficult in a way.
Mm. Admit it's a far cry from when we were at Canal Road and Zane live streaming from up in the trees, eh?
Yeah,
100%.
But the principle's still the same, eh? Like once you were able to show people that you were there and that this activism was happening, it really, the community swelled around it, and the community and beyond, eh?
It's not just like it's the modi. It's like the energy of the people that doesn't change. Do you know, when the people unite and they mobilize behind something, especially if the organizing's there and the strategy is there, that essence always remains the same. That kind of idea of the power of the people, that will always exist. This is the forever fight, whānau. You know, when we know and we can see people being oppressed, we'll always unite and find strategies and ways that will undermine the pillars that hold that up. And that's so important. And, you know, there's many different ways that this happens, but essentially the modi, the fire, the spark within people is always what forces change, especially within this activism environment, and that never changes. You feel that at Ihumātao, you feel it at Canal Road when the people are together and they're behind a kaupapa. Yo, that power that's there, it can hold you in trees for months, for some people for years, you know, like the willingness that people will have to take action when they care, that essence remains the same, whether it be from parihaka right until now. There's that kind of people uniting. That's such a powerful thing, and that will never change.
And we saw that just a couple of weeks ago with
100%.
20,000 people or so coming out on Saturday to march for nature.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a
Toi Tutu Treaty the week before. There's, you know, the genocide that's occurring at the moment, and the people who constantly week after week, mihi ki a rātou, showing up and just showing the power of people. You know, that's not something that, even though I know Greenpeace organised and helped with that, they don't make people turn up. What makes people turn up is that voice that's inside you that says, yo, I've had enough of this. And that's why 20,000 people turn up for to stop the fast track. That's why thousands and thousands of people turned up for Toi Tu Te Treaty as well, because we can all identify it, we can all feel it, so we all need to do something.
So the march, it's a like one way of kind of showing discontent, but I think the one kind of tactic in common in tree protection that you've both spoken about is direct action. So sitting and physically stopping trees from being chopped down, and I think we saw through Canal Road, and I'm sure in Native Forest Action too, many people putting their bodies on the line in between trees and chainsaws. Can we talk a bit about direct action? What is it? I'll hand that to both of you. What is it, and why do we use it as activists? And then we'll go specifically into trees.
You lead, Brian.
What is direct action? I think, yeah, I mean, it can be many things, and I think lots of people have different definitions for what it is, but ultimately I think it's putting yourself in the way, or putting yourself in between trees in this instance and the harm that will be done to them if you're not there. And through doing that, stopping something happening. But I think part of the power of that is that people see you doing that, and seeing somebody doing a brave thing like that inspires them to become involved as well. And whenever we see direct action happen, it almost always draws people in and creates something bigger than just the one or two people that do it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, direct action is my favourite type of activism. It's my favourite type. It's what works. When, whether it be, you know, when Pāngia showed up at Ihumātao and things stopped there and you actually get in the way of things happening, or in the morning of the first time the police turned, after we had taken the trees in at Canal Road, the first time the police showed up, and the night before we put a call out, and then the next day there was a couple hundred people just standing below us on those trees, turning up and just stopping something from happening. It's not just the march that happens down the road, or it's not just the banner that gets dropped to show people like this is a kaupapa that is worth supporting. It's the actually getting in front of things, stopping that from happening. And with what is proposed through the fast track, I guarantee that is what is coming. It's a fast track to a fight. There were, not just with me at Canal Road, but you know, I sat in Canal Road on the day the police came that day. There would have been 10 other climbers there willing to get arrested. I'm pretty sure all 3 of us got arrested, some people multiple times at Canal Road, just that willingness to stop it. And some of the times when people got arrested, no cameras, no nothing. But that led to more and more people showing up, more and more. And it's that action that you take when you have had enough that actually stops that occurring. It's called a march. I love marching, it's amazing. But there is no more powerful feeling that I feel than when I'm standing in front of the person that I want to stop doing that action, whether it be stopping trees coming down, whatever that might be. That's when I feel powerful. When I'm standing against my adversary and saying, no, Carl, I have agency here, you know? And so that's what direct action to me is. Direct action is actually getting in the way of the perpetrator, getting in the way of your adversary and stopping that thing from happening. Ahako the outcome. You know, for all 3 of us, we know that sometimes that means that you do spend a night in the cells. Heoi, however, if it's right, then it's wrong for us to not take action. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about the kind of first day of Canal Road. I think Willie Lee, kind of who lived down the road from the trees, was driving past and saw people there with chainsaws and chippers and literally just stopped his car, got out of his car and went and stood in front of it and said, no, what are you doing?
100%.
So I guess it doesn't have to be always, you know, the glamorous shot with the huge banner in it and lots of climbing experience. Sometimes it can just be turning up and saying, nah.
And Papa Willie didn't know what, like there is no way that he comprehended what he was going to start in that moment. That became like a 300+ day occupation.
That's a great example.
Through that one action that somebody took. And once it stopped, it gave inroads for other, that small pause that he caused gave inroads for other people to come in. I came in after that. There were already people just like hanging on to trees, you know, just clutching to them. And from there it grew. Soon there were houses, you know, soon there were people living with a wharekai and feeding the people in the trees. So that one action that Willie took just sparked this massive movement. That's what people don't understand about taking action, is like what comes from that. Just you can never tell, you know.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, you know, like when we're going up against corporations and even governments, and we can make a website, but they can make a better website, and we can do fundraising, but they've always got more money, and we can do all sorts of things, but they can do more and better. But we can take direct action, and they've got no answer to that.
Kia ora.
They can't do that again. They can't do the same thing back to us, you know. So, and through, like you said, through taking direct action, you always inspire other people to join the movement, and the more people that join, the more people are willing to do it, and the harder it gets to stop us. And that's why usually in the end we win.
What are some of the other jobs? I mean, both of you have been at the pointy end of the direct action, sitting in the trees, helping people get chained onto helicopters, all of that really kind of glamorous pointy end of direct action. But there's heaps of other things that happen behind the scenes that people who aren't in those roles do as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, some of that's kind of tended to be you at Greenpeace, Nick, doing some of the other roles, but what else do people do?
Oh, I mean, it's everything. it's everything.
Holding the tea towel.
Yeah, and that's the important mahi. That is so much of the important mahi. It was relatively easy for me to sit in the tree and just hold that space, but it was all the other things. It was the 1 o'clock in the morning phone calls from people like, hey, we're writing this press release about this thing. There's a bunch of us. Have you got a quote here? You know, all of those things happen around it. It's never, ever just one person taking action. It's like a whole team of people. There were people feeding me night and day. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, swinging around a tree. I'd look down and there would be a crew of people there just to support me. Zane, you all right? Kai would come up to me, cups of teas. This is for multiple climbers holding that. So there's so much tea towel work to do. And to be honest, that's the most important work, whānau, especially when you're showing solidarity. Like within the Palestine movement, it's not my place to kind of hold the mic. It's not my place to do that. It's my place to pick up the tea towel. You know, and make sure that we hold space for them, that we keep them safe. There are so many different roles. The comms are important. Engaging with mana whenua. All of those types of things are so important when it comes to an action. It's not just about taking the action, it's like the strategy that goes into it and all the comms lines and everything that's behind it.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to get involved, and if anyone's thinking about wanting to get involved but being afraid of having to be the person that gets arrested, you don't have to do that. You know, there's lots of other things that you can do, and you know, here when we do something, there's the banners that are painted beforehand, and there's any number of roles that are really, really important. So there's lots of ways to get involved.
To me, the first step on a direct action is always like checking if you could get what you want by asking for it first.
Yeah.
And I think trees are a really nice example on that. Like I think a lot of people in Mana Rākau have experienced hearing chainsaws, going to investigate, and then saying, oh, hey, do you know the value of this tree on your property? You probably shouldn't chop it down for all these reasons. And usually after a bit, well, not usually, sometimes after a bit of negotiation, people are like, oh, I didn't know that.
100%.
So it's kind of like taking that initiative to say, hey, this isn't right. Do you know it's not right?
Yeah.
And obviously it's different when you're campaigning against a corporation or a government, but not always. And sometimes it's that first step of saying, like, something's wrong here. Hey.
Yeah, 100%. I've had multiple occurrences where that has happened, and even where, especially with trees, where trees have been coming down, we have stopped it. They have engaged with council and consultants, and then when they actually get engaged with a group that cared about trees, they were like, oh wow, this is the value that they have, and were more than willing to retain them. So yeah, quite often it is that just ask thing. However, and this is just to address the arrest thing, there's no glory in being arrested. There should be value in it. Like every time, too often people are arrested for no outcome at all. But when you are going out there and you are putting yourself in that position where you may be arrested, you should really know what you're doing there. You can't just like run, it's that fool's rush in. Understanding, yes, it's important to stop things sometimes, but there's also this element of understanding the value of what you're doing when you are being arrested. Because often, like you say, you could have just asked and stopped that portion.
But not always.
Not always. Not always.
So you spoke a little bit about strategy, and we've talked about the importance of kind of like turning up all of the numbers of different roles there are in activism. But we've also touched on strategy a little bit. What does being strategic mean to you?
Like, good activism stands on a strong foundation of good strategy, you know. Someone I highly respect says that, you know, activism, you need to be as smart as organized crime at this point. Do you know, I mean, like, that's how much strategy has to go into this. Yeah, if you're not putting in that work to organise before you mobilise, often your campaign is lost already. You know, you have to know what your demands are. You have to know who those key pillars are in your kind of understanding of what your theory of change is, what you're aiming for there. And that's where strategy can be so important, because often direct actions can be the perfect thing, but then other times there are direct communications, there are marches and rallies and things like that. So it's understanding what your kaupapa is and what the right strategy is to apply to really speak into your demand, what you're asking for. All of that stuff is so important in activism, especially when you're talking about keeping people safe, you know?
Yeah, you've got to know who has the power and work out what the lever is that you can pull to make them make the change that needs to happen. There's no point campaigning against somebody who hasn't got the power, so you need to, that's where the strategy comes in. And you know, they say tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So there's lots of things we can do, but unless we're being careful about how we put, it's like a chess game, you know, like you've got to do these moves before those moves are going to work, and you've got to know where you're going at all times and stick to it.
So in native forest action, was direct action the main tactic that was used?
Certainly in the beginning, the beginning of the campaign was an occupation of the forest, so that's a direct action. That was people like Zane did as well, going into the forest, climbing the trees and being in the trees for days on end and weeks on end. So physically stopping the logging operation from going ahead. So direct action in that sense for sure. And then there was lots of examples of other direct actions that we did, like someone we all know who locked himself by the neck to the top of a helicopter so that the helicopter couldn't be used for the day, and so that was certainly direct action. And there was other instances of blockading roads and just stopping things happening. So it was definitely always a central part of the campaign, but by no means the only thing that we would do either. There was a lot of other stuff that goes in and around that this is just as important, you know, and they sort of work with each other to make the campaign work. So just raising awareness, you know, and we would spend a lot of nights out just putting posters up with glue, you know, on power poles and stuff, and chalking, and even a little bit of graffiti here and there, just to raise awareness. You know, that was a big part of the campaign as well. So because, like I said before, you know, the whole thing would have happened out of sight, out of mind in these forests, which are quite remote. You know, they're not places that many people have been or know about, you know. And even now, I think people don't necessarily know that we've got those forests down there. They're ancient forests that have evolved here since it was Gondwana land, you know. And they're the original forests, you know. Obviously, the trees are not original, but some of those trees down there, some of the rimu trees are you know, 1,000 years old. They're really old trees, and anyway, I'm getting off track, but what was the question?
No.
The trees. Yeah.
The trees.
Yeah. Raising awareness, you know, so showing people what was at stake was a big part of the campaign as well.
Yeah. And it's just that idea of strategic escalation. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes you can come right out the gate hard, and then sometimes for your kaupapa. And this was one of the big problems with Canal Road. Essentially, we were trying to save a small group of trees whilst also fighting to save and reenact tree protection across Tāmaki Makaurau. And therein, we had this kind of like strategic kind of conundrum where we were like, well, if we just ask for this one thing, that might have been strategically a better thing, and we may have won for Canal Road, but then we would have definitely lost in terms of not bringing any attention to the larger idea of tree protection. It's just those ideas of like, what are we asking for here? How is that perceived by the public? And how do we grow that in the public's mind so that they understand this is something worth fighting for? And with the fast track, that was a perfect example of like 20,000 people instantly willing to come out to take to the streets. But often some kaupapa aren't quite like that, and you kind of need to build towards that and have a timeline where you understand or hear, build, so that at this time we have a nation of people that are walking behind us. That's all a part of the strategic portion of activism. You know, really clearly understanding what are the pillars that hold this up, how do we undermine those, how do we leverage our power holders to understand that this is something of real value.
Talking about raising awareness, it reminded me of I don't know how you felt about it, but it seemed like a deeply frustrating moment of international fame in the middle of the Canal Road.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. How about?
Tell us about your international moment of fame.
No, this is the thing that I'm talking about. Because...
What happened?
Well, I mean, my biggest and moment of notoriety was when a cockroach crawled into my ear, and doctors didn't diagnose it properly, and it lived there for a few days, and then they pulled it out. And this was world news. This is right in the time where I've just spent the best part of a year living in a tree, fighting to get some attention for something that was really meaningful to the community that we're a part of, and then for a larger part of Aotearoa also. Nothing. But when something as meaningless as a cockroach crawling into, I'm getting interviewed by international news sources. And for me at the time, I was just like, how has this happened that you're kind of dedicating your life to something that's valuable, that you want to bring attention to, and then all of a sudden you're world news because you've had a cockroach in your ear. And even then, I was trying to leverage every interview to be like, oh, by the way, tree protection, do you know about all of the people who are admitting here? All of the... So, yeah, it's crazy what will pick up attention. I'm trying to have that cockroach moment for Te Tai Ao. Do you know what I mean? For trying to have a moment where we can blow up over protecting the environment, protecting Rākau, But yeah, he tohu o te wā, sign of the times that we're living in,
It was really like that
funny.
movie, Don't Look Up, hey? It was kind of a bizarre moment in time.
And it was right around the same time as well, and all of that was just how is this happening,
Yeah, you got to laugh though. You got to keep the lighter side of it in the activism. Hey, we're going to turn to some audience questions. There's quite a few questions from people listening to the chat. So Diana's asking, are there any parliamentarians who actually care about or champion urban tree protection?
There definitely are. Weirdly, so when we made submissions, another part of activism, making submissions around the Natural Built Environments Bill, Chris Bishop was there, and he actually said, there's something to this tree protection thing. He could see the destruction. He willingly admitted, as someone who stands in opposition to this, that there was value in tree protection being reenacted. And we had this moment where we thought that we would get tree protection back through that bill, but then obviously National came through. That's gone. Not only that, they're probably going to ramp it up again. But I truly believe that tree protection crosses party lines. And there was this moment at Canal Road, this is right towards the end, where a National MP came down and sat with us to talk to us because he could feel how much of the community were down there, and it intersected with his voter base as well. And that was something really crazy to me. Was that, hold on, often we would get people who were down at Canal Road and they might not be environmentalists, but they love trees. They just love trees in their neighborhood, and they were down with this kaupapa. So there's heaps. Obviously, all of our Green MPs have supported this. There's been numerous MPs from Labour that have been down with us at Canal Road. We had Te Pāti Māori come along also, but I truly believe that there's people on the other side who actually think there's value in us having tree protection in our urban environments, you know. So yeah, it was amazing when Chris Bishop said that to us. We're like, we might win here, you know.
I mean, ultimately, no one wants to live in a neighbourhood without trees. So.
100%. 100%.
There's probably quite a few opposition MPs now that could have done a little bit more while they were in government.
That was,
That's true.
Yeah.
There's also another question, and I wanted to ask you both this too. I wanted to ask you both what's your favourite tree, but someone's gone a little bit further and wants to know your top 5 trees. What are your top 5? We'll start with
That's
one.
a tough
Start
question.
with one. What's your top tree, both of you? Individual tree, I don't know if they mean individual trees or types of trees.
It's a hard one, that's really hard for me. But it would probably be matai. So I whakapapa through Ngāti Pikiao, and there's an amazing story about Hine Hōpū and how she was placed in a matai tree to avoid a war party that had come through. The tree is still there, and just I only recently found out about my whakapapa and all of these connections, but to know that Hine Hōpū was protected by Rākau, and then I spent a good portion of my life protecting Rākau, he tohu tērā, that's something that means something to me. So matai is definitely up there. Maire as well. Just because maire is what drew me to Canal Road, those 2 trees that were 100 years old and you could still put your hand around. So maire and matai, definitely those 2. But I could go on for ages about my top 5. I could even tell you my individual top 5 trees in Aotearoa, where they are and stuff like that. So, but yeah, matai and maire, definitely my favourite woods. You know.
I've never thought about having a favourite tree, so I'm not sure that I do, but I think the trees that I have the most connection with are the trees that we saved on the west coast, and those were notably the rimu trees, the really big rimu trees there, and some of them are absolutely giant. And I'll never forget those trees, you know. And also the beech trees, because they were going after two different forest types and 2 different trees, and the beech trees were, I mean, the rimu trees they were cutting down to make furniture, but the beech trees, also ancient, big, giant trees, were going to get wood chipped, which is even more ridiculous. But yeah, those trees are amazing, you know, and they live down there in this sort of what is it? It's like temperate rainforest, and that little remnant of forest down there is just the last bit really that exists in the country, and there's not much else like it. So those trees, and you know, it looks like something from Lord of the Rings. Well, it is something from the Lord of the Rings, but yeah, they're something else when you go down there and you see them in their sort of forest state rather than just a tree on its own, with all of this other stuff that lives on them and in them and around them. Yeah, and I quite like cabbage trees too.
Zane, do you want to show us your...
That?
Yeah, tell us about that. I think that's a pretty good example of some of your favourite trees.
So whānau, this is what's left of the trees at Canal Road. Koira te maire, so that's the maire there. And then I lived in this tree and that tree. That's the pūriri and the rewa that I was tied to. So this has all been made out of the trees at Canal Road. That's the matai that was on site. Tawa, tōtara, obviously, maire. And so this is what's left of Canal Road for me. I started my reo journey in the trees at Canal Road. I was literally zooming into my te reo Māori classes whilst in those trees. And at that same time, I started growing my hair. So when the trees were cut down, this was made into a heru for me. I don't wear it, but man, it gives me so much inspiration. And this could have been a ngāhere whānau This could have been a ngahere in like a neighborhood where kereru were flying around, and there were like some of the only puro-kaiwhiri there, and tui were flying around, and tiwaiwaka, and that's all that's left of this space. And there's not a building built. There's not a building built at Canal Road. It's sat there for years, just a bare space. So yeah, that's what's left of what we fought for. All of us were arrested for. We were really lucky, whānau, that some of the woods were given to different places, i Humātao, so to Hoani Waititi. So, you know, it wasn't all loss. It's still not all lost, because, you know, this fight continues. But yeah, to know that this is a ngahere that could have been in like a poor neighbourhood in Tāmaki Makaurau, where kids are growing up just like I grew up, and they don't have those trees to connect with. That's not right, y'all. And that's not a New Zealand that New Zealanders should be cool with. We need beautiful cities with ngahere and manu in them. And I'm totally down for doing it all over again. I think that's something that the government don't realise, is that there are so many people willing to do this all over again, not just to protect ngahere in urban environments, but all across Aotearoa.
Someone in the comments is saying, sadly, it's bad for urban trees in Pōneke too, and that the council almost seems to see trees as a pain, and that it's impossible to have trees listed on private or public land.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we experienced in Tāmaki as well, eh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard, I won't name them, but I've definitely heard like people from within councils refer to trees as just street furniture. Do you know, things that can move around, cut down, and that's not what they are. You know, trees are alive, whānau, and they provide such an amazing thing for us. And there are trees in Tāmaki Makaurau that, you know, they might not be 1,000 years old, but they're hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they're important to they're a representation of the heritage of this country. And man, we need to find some way to protect them.
Because the tragic thing is, at Canal Road, they could have built some houses there without cutting the trees down as well, right?
That's the worst thing about it.
Yeah.
Well, the unwillingness. Like, they could have built there, retained some of the trees. They could have done a land swap. There were so many other ways that they could have approached this. But for those trees to be gone from Auckland, it's a sign that things have gone too far. Things have just like that, their baseline has shifted so far now that the norm for people is that there be no trees in your neighbourhood. Like, we can't just be settling for that. You know, that can't be something that just becomes the norm for people in Aotearoa.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the worries with the fast track as well, hey, around nature is just something that you can have development, or you can have nature, or you can have houses, or you can have nature, and this kind of unwillingness to think, actually, why can't we have both? Why can't we be ambitious enough for ourselves and for our society to have both?
The worst thing is, for me, as somebody who worked in industry, like, you know, a lot of people, oh, a tree hugger. Yo, not many people have cut down as many trees as me. Like, I have been the person cutting those trees while the helicopter flies them out. However, like that soon grows real old, being that person who is that point of destruction. And it's so much better for our wairua, for our cities, you know, for everybody to just like, in the year 2000, I was working in tree work, and if you wanted to cut a big tree down, you had to talk to an arborist, you had to involve the council. The council would they'd do an assessment on the value of that tree to that neighbourhood. This is the year 2000. This is the year 1990. We were more advanced in our way of ensuring that we built beautiful cities and we'd done density well before 2010. So like we're heading in the wrong direction. It's not that we can't do it well, We used to do it perfectly. We used to do it really well. We used to do it so well that there's countries and cities around the world that base their tree protection models on a model that we evaporated, and now they're leading the world and things like that. You just have to look to places like Singapore, built sponge cities, places like Melbourne, same thing. It's not that we can't do it. We used to do it really, really well. I was a part of that, and I saw not just our trees evaporate. I watched my industry evaporate with it. I watched like this influx of people who had no qualifications, no ethics around trees, become the linchpin of the industry now. That's what it is, and it's totally different. And going back to the way it was is so much better. And that's weird to me, to think 20 years and all we've been doing is gradually going backwards and backwards and backwards.
I mean, one of the beautiful things at Canal Road, I think, was that we had a giant clothesline with T-shirts from dozens of arborists around the country who'd said, no,
56 different companies' shirts were up on those lines of arborists from that industry that wanted tree protection brought back. We understand as arborists that the industry has actually got way worse since tree protection went away. Now, if you're talking about the government at the moment, they're meant to be like a government of industry that is meant to be, you know what I mean? Protecting those people, ensuring the fact that when we were seen as a more professional industry, we could charge a lot more. You know, we knew that we were doing things in a very professional way, and taking away all of that legislation that made sure that we upheld our professional duty is what has led to less money in this industry, the destruction of trees all across Aotearoa, and it's led to me like not being able to work in that industry anymore because I can't just be an agent of that chaos, you know?
Someone here is saying dodgy or immoral, but technically legal. Tree felling happens all the time that we may be not aware of. How do we keep on top of and aware of the ngahere risk?
Yep.
How do we know what's at risk?
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard. And especially, not even all the arborists know. Not even the people who are meant to be undertaking their duty of care to protect trees in our community. You know, we saw just recently people getting fined significant amounts for cutting down heritage trees that they claim they didn't even know about. Most people in your neighbourhood wouldn't know what the heritage trees in your neighbourhood are, but let's just pretend they all are, eh? And let's just go out there, and when you see people cutting down big trees especially, just engage with them. Just ensure, like, are we sure that's not protected? Call the council. Make sure that those things are happening. But also, if you have big native trees in your neighbourhood and you're watching them get cut down and you're not happy with that, there's also means that you can take action there. You can reach out to people like Mana Rākau who are willing to do that.
And sometimes, you're talking about the Māori specifically, but sometimes old trees aren't even big trees, hey?
Oh, no. So, I went to a person's house for a tree that's waiting to be put on to be listed as protected. We went to their house. I asked if it was on their property. They didn't know. I showed them to it. It's Metrosideros bartlei, which is like a really, really rare form of rata. Tree wasn't even like 5 meters high, but it's incredibly rare. I'd say it'd be one of 2 or 3 in Auckland. When they knew, they were like, wow, really? And I was like, have you seen it flower? And they're like, yeah, it flowers white. A white flowering pohutukawa. They just had no idea, you know? So like not everybody knows, and not every tree needs to be gigantic for it to be valuable. But that tree in particular, kohe, they just provide so much in terms of value for like our manu. And that's super important. Man, I want to live in a city, especially in Tāmaki Makaurau, like, wouldn't it be a dream to just see like kia, like flying around, not kia, but kaka, flying around in Tāmaki Makaurau. Like that's a possibility but not if we keep cutting our trees down. You know, it's a possibility for us to have keriru in South Auckland flying around, not just in Tōtara Park, but like in our neighbourhoods, but not if we keep cutting our trees down. You know, we deserve that stuff.
It's interesting. One of the things the council talks about a lot is, it's all right, we're planting lots of trees. What do either of you have to say? I mean, and I presume that's something that is talked about when you're chopping down native forests as well. So, well, we'll plant more.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about an old growth forest, there's no replacing the big trees. You can't replace a tree with a sapling and think that you haven't done the damage that you did by taking out the big tree. Hey, and I guess that's the same in the city as well, even more so possibly.
Yeah, and there's so many other benefits that the trees provide in terms of like, once they're big, trees sequester carbon. When they're really small, they don't do a very good job of that. So big trees sequester carbon a lot better. Then you have the idea of tree saturation. So that when it rains, big trees hold a lot of water, you know, and so that slows our sewage systems and our waterways from being like overloaded. So young plantings do none of that. They don't do that. And I'm not saying stop planting trees, keep doing that, that's good. Just stop cutting down all of our big trees. And then, you know, when you look at a place like Canal Road, well, you look at Canal Road and you can easily identify that kind of makes up 1 million trees that you could plant in the 45 large trees that were there. So we could have had 1 million trees planted and those trees. That's what we want. It's not one or the other, it's both. It's definitely both at the moment, specifically in our urban environments. It isn't a coincidence that Māngere was hit so hard by the floods, like intensified. All the trees have been cut down, it rains, and we have swimming pools there. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect, you know?
Yeah, and there's the biodiversity question as well, you know, like we're literally in a climate and biodiversity crisis globally and also in New Zealand, and we've lost many species in New Zealand. We have one of the highest rates of species extinction in New Zealand. So, you know, every big old tree is a whole ecosystem in itself, right? It has a big rimu tree or whatever has a lot of other stuff living in it, and that's really important and really hard to replace. So. And that, you know, that's true on a micro level in a city and on a macro level in a forest, and globally it's true as well. So it's hard to overstate how important the big trees and the old trees in the forest and the natural forests are.
Yeah.
And you can't replant biodiversity. Hey? You can't just say, oh, we're going to recreate a native forest.
100%.
You know,
that's impossible. Yeah.
So once it's gone, it's gone. So Mana Rākau have a petition to bring back general tree protection that people can sign. What else can people do to protect trees?
Like, listen to that little voice inside them. You know, believe in the power that they have. Like, you have agency. Show up, whānau. Show up. There are constantly different movements, whether we're taking things to Parliament, whether we're engaging with Council, whether you want to sit and write a letter to the Council, all of those different things, they matter. But it's about doing something. That same thing that Papa Willie done at Canal Road, by just believing in his ability to do something, if you do that, if you believe and then you take action in whatever way makes you feel most comfortable. If you're the type of person that's like good on a computer and you want to send a whole bunch of emails to councils, if you want to fill in your petitions, do that. If you want to show up, show up. But believe that your contribution is super valuable. Because the first time I went up that tree, I didn't. I just thought that I'd be arrested the next day and that would be the end of that. 300 days later, I was like, I really wish that I had been arrested that next day, because these things go on for ages. You just don't know how much your action is going to ripple out in the world and cause more things to happen, snowball. So sign the petition, do that, but get active. Get active. Believe that you can be an agent of change, and you don't know what will happen. We just need more people like that. Aha koa te aha. No matter what, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're like super intellectual, if you're no schooling, whoever it might be, we need everybody. Everybody has to be on this front line at the moment, whānau, because this government is relentless. You know, they're throwing it down at the moment, and we need to meet them head on. So it's important that the first thing you do is care, the next thing you do is take action.
And what you said before too is important too, like just being an advocate for the trees around you. Like notice the trees that are on your property and your neighbour's property, and when you see a tree being cut down, go and ask and check whether it's protected and find out which trees are protected around you, and that's useful too.
100%.
And fight the fast track, because the fast track is an abomination, and you know, the fast track approvals bill that the government has proposed is going to mean that a lot of areas are under threat that were previously protected, and including some of the land, some of the forest that we fought for in the days of Native Forest Action in the late 90s and early 2000s that were then saved and made into national park forests. They weren't all made into national parks, so the national parks are still safe, luckily, but you know, there was 180,000 hectares of forest that was in that portion of land that was transferred from Timberlands, the state-owned logging company, to the Department of Conservation, and I think it was around 30,000 of that went into the national park, but the rest of it is in other grades of conservation land. So I forget the names of them, but yeah, that land now in theory is open to be logged or mined or exploited in other ways if there's a company that can find their way through the fast track and get approved by one of those three ministers, Shane Jones and Chris Bishop and that other guy.
Simeon Brown.
Simeon Brown.
No one ever remembers his name.
Just the three of them, you know, and there's no checks and balances and there's no oversight, and the whole thing is designed specifically to go around and shortcut the rules that were put in place to protect the places that need protecting. So we need to fight the fast track. Is one of the things we can do, one of the main things we can do at the moment to protect forests and trees.
Yeah, and that's it. They're just finding these ways around through the legislation, but they're not going to find a way through people. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're standing in front of them, it's way harder to go around them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's no shortcut.
no shortcut there.
No shortcut.
Yeah, no.
So sign the petition to bring back general tree protection, fight the fast track approvals bill, like and subscribe to Greenpeace Live so you can catch more of these wonderful activists and guests that we'll have on the show. We've come to the end of our show. Both of you, it's an honour and a privilege to stand beside you in this long fight for tree protection and everything else we've got to fight for in the weeks and months and years coming forward.
Yep, there's plenty to do.
Plenty to do. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. So please like and subscribe and follow us in the comment section. Thank you.